Welcome to the 11th episode of Accessibility Now, stories about accessibility in Georgia.
And if we don't have any kind of emotional connection with these stories, then it doesn't matter if we're saying, we got to change it. If nobody cares about it, then nobody's going to want to do anything about it.
Accessibility Now is a podcast produced by the Statewide Independent Living Council of Georgia. I'm your host, Desi Gillespie, and today we're talking about Inclusion, a documentary looking back on the legacy of the Americans with Disabilities Act, 30 years after its adoption. The film was funded and produced by our very own Statewide Independent Living Council, and it features interviews with nationally recognized advocates and other influential people with disabilities, like Tony Award-winning actress Ali Stroker. We sat down with the film's director, Ty Hunt, and asked how the project got started, what the process of creation was like, and what he learned from the experience.
I met with Shelley and Kelly. They were saying, hey, we have the 30th anniversary of the Americans with Disabilities Act being signed into law, and we want to tell the story about how it started and why, even though this law has been around for 30 years, why it's still not necessarily where we need it to be. One of the things that we really wanted to do was make sure that we focused on what are the key aspects to telling this story. The initial plan was only to make like a 5-minute, this is cool video, nothing too crazy. But again, as we were speaking, we were like, this is a lot bigger than just a 5-minute little promo video can really contain. And so what do we really need to do to make this an actual story? And so we went back and forth on the budget just because, there are things that I wanted to do that we just couldn't afford, but it didn't take away from the heart of the story. And that's what the most important thing was, getting to the point where, like, even if we had to travel to different states and, different locations, it was like, how important is this to telling our story? Is it like, yes, we need this, or this is a nice to have? And so we absolutely focused on the most crucial, critical elements.
Ty has an extensive background in communication and the arts. Recently, he's founded Lighthawk Studios, his own production company based here in Georgia in the metro Atlanta area.
So I went to film school after being an actor for a little while. And then, my very first job out of school was a Budweiser commercial in Orlando. That's where I was. And that commercial went on to win an Emmy. And while I wasn't part of the creative team to actually come up with the idea and all that kind of stuff, I was part of the production team to actually help, get it to the finish line.
Here's a clip from that commercial, which aired during Super Bowl 48. It's a documentary-style short about a veteran's return home.
It's for all of us. It's for my friend Andy Rankin that didn't come home. But I'm so happy that we're a small part of this. And it's a wonderful thing to do.
I think the strength of our country comes from how well we come together as a community.
And so it was kind of a, yes, I'm in the right spot kind of moment for me. I started out as a production assistant, worked my way up from a PA to a second assistant director to a second unit director on a Disney / Coca-Cola commercial. And, it was at that point that I was like, yeah, I can kind of do this on my own, because I was running basically the entire set.
Ty doesn't live with a disability, and the project was really one of his first forays into the disability advocacy scene.
I came into it really not knowing much of anything, because I didn't have any real exposure to anybody with any disabilities. Granted, I had met people with disabilities, but not really connected in that kind of way where I truly understood what the issues were. And so that was kind of the perspective that I took with this, because with them saying that it's not quite where it needs to be, my first question is why? What's missing? And, what is it that people just aren't getting? And so those are the questions that I asked, again, from a purely I know nothing kind of mindset. And as we were talking, I was like, this is the story. Because one of the dudes in the documentary, I think Mark said, if you invited me to your home, could I actually come in? And I'm like, actually, no, you couldn't, and so I never really thought about those type of things. And so having those conversations with people and just understanding, again, what's missing really helped to inform what the story needed to be.
Here's a clip from Inclusion featuring the Mark Ty just mentioned. Mark Johnson, longtime disability rights activist and Georgia resident, talking about what's been missing in the fight for inclusion of people with disabilities over the years.
There's a rallying cry in the disability rights movement that says nothing about us without us. And so we're still not at enough tables. We're still not participating in enough of the conversations that impact our own lives. I mean, there's been well-intended people over the years that thought they knew what was best for people with disabilities. Well, that turned out to be institutions and segregated schools and special this and special that. And we're saying, wait a minute, we're the experts. We live this experience, so we know the answers, or at least we can contribute to the answers. And so what's missing still, I think, is enough relationships, between our peers that are non-disabled.
Shelley and Kelly both had a lot of really great insight because they lived it with, Shelley being the executive director of SILC and then Kelly being the marketing coordinator for them. They lived this day in and day out. And then also Shelley's team, from Parker to Rebecca, they were invaluable with the insight that they were able to provide. It was really good for me to really talk with them, but also kind of follow them around and see what it was like to deal with, just everyday life. There's a shot like going to the diner, just having lunch with a team. I was literally just kind of a fly on the wall, being like, how are they going to just get into the door? Because they didn't have one of those automatic doors and, stuff like that. Beyond just eye-opening, it was educational, because even like the verbiage that I was using, I had to, educate myself on, what was the proper way of referring to something or things of that nature. So it was a very educational process for sure. And again, Shelley's team was invaluable in helping me to overcome that barrier that I had.
Comprehensive accessibility was a guiding star for inclusion, not just for its messaging, but for its presentation too. The documentary includes captions and features some interviewees who use nonverbal communication, like ASL, which is also dubbed over for those with vision impairments.
Shelley was very important, very key on saying, hey, we got to make this as accessible as possible, because again, that's kind of the point, right? So, from day one, she was like, we want to make sure that everybody can essentially enjoy this. And so when we had our chats, I was asking her, like, what are some of the things that I need to do to be able to make this more accessible to people that either are, hearing impaired or vision impaired or, something like that. And so it was a different experience for me just because I had never had to do that before. I never even thought about it. But it informed, it forced me to do things in a different way than I was used to, than even the way that I was taught, because like even just interviews, for example, having space to, put that nonverbal communication in there. I was like, this feels weird. Like I'm, holding on this shot too long or whatever. But, when you put it into the edit, you need that extra space so that, the person can go in and say, this is what's happening for somebody that can't see it. And so, like I said, it was pretty much baked in from day one, because again, Shelley was very, very adamant about making sure that it was accessible for everybody.
For Ty, it was a special experience to interact with the various people interviewed in the documentary. He heard about the best ways to foster inclusion firsthand from various advocates, and those principles have stuck with him.
Ali Stroker really stood out to me just because of her background in the arts. That's something that we connected with as well, since I have that background. But the thing that I like about her story is that her entire life has been the ADA. She doesn't know what life is without it. And so she's been able to do a lot of really great things because of it. And she uses her platform because she's, doing a lot of really great things. And she has a very public personality online. And she's using that platform to encourage people that are like her, whether, same disability or otherwise, to take advantage of the position that you're in. Because even though you have a disability, it doesn't necessarily mean that you can't do something. And I think that's one of the things that really, really stuck with me, because across the board, that's what people are dealing with on a daily basis anyway, just figuring out their place, their role, their purpose, so to speak.
Winning the Tony this past year for Best Supporting Actress was crazy. It was amazing. And when I thought about what I wanted to say that night, I saw like my 11-year-old self seeing Beauty and the Beast, and was reminded of how many shows I had gone to, and I'd never, ever, ever seen anyone like me. And so what I said about dedicating the award to all the kids who have disabilities and limitations and challenges and who've never seen themselves represented, that now they are, that was not just saying, I see you, like you are represented now, but also like a call to action that like you can do this too. So like no excuses, let's go.
Listening to her was really encouraging and inspiring to me, for sure. It wasn't like I was meeting Allie, the person in the wheelchair. I was meeting Allie, the Tony Award winning actress that, was on Broadway. And so I was just talking to her about her experiences, and it naturally led into the conversation of how is she able to do that in the wheelchair. You just build up that rapport with somebody, and naturally the conversation will lead there, because again, people that have these disabilities, they're willing to speak about it in some way. And, honestly, sometimes they won't, but you got to give them that space. You can't just be like, I want to know, it's my right to know. It's like, who cares about that? Just learn who that person is, and, build a relationship with that person so that you can open up the opportunity. If you and that person want to have that conversation, it'll happen.
Ty also says that he's been able to take the things he learned from inclusion and apply them in other areas of his business, both conceptual and practical lessons.
I'm much more mindful of including people with disabilities into stories. I did a commercial a while back, and it needed somebody in a wheelchair. And I was like, why would we pay somebody? Why would we hire an actor that doesn't already have a wheelchair? That doesn't make any sense. Let's go find a community of somebody that is an actor that can, has a wheelchair, put them in a thing and call it a day. I didn't really think about stuff like that before. And I think one of the things that Allie said to me that really struck with me too was she takes roles that are just roles. She's not looking for, somebody in a wheelchair role. You know what I mean? So she's like, taking on roles that can be literally anybody, and she crushes it. And she just happens to be in a wheelchair. And that's just part of what makes her character unique. That really stuck with me because, for the longest time, I would only, it wasn't in any kind of malicious way. It's just, just a natural way of thinking. I was like, well, this person is in a wheelchair. This character doesn't really call for that. So do I need to, should I cast that person in it? But speaking with her, she was like, no, you can, I can play a role, I can do anything, I just gotta switch it up a little bit to make it work for me. But that's what happens in roles anyway. And so having conversations like that, having conversations with Mark, just about really having that emotional connection. I think that's what he said, just have that emotional connection first before you have any kind of intellectual change. That's super important too, because again, the thing that really got me was seeing how a lot of the people had to live before the ADA, and then also some of the challenges that they're still facing. Again, with me not knowing, I couldn't feel anything. But now that I know, it's just like, oh, that sucks. We got to fix it. We can't keep this going,
Working on inclusion has changed the way Ty looks at accessibility features in his daily life. He's realized the discrimination and stigma people with disabilities can face, and he's more of an advocate than he's ever been.
There have definitely been strides to make things more inclusive, like, just something as simple as putting captions on videos for social media. I don't even turn on the audio, turn on the sound half the time, when I'm watching something on Instagram. I'll just read the captions because, whatever reason, but that's just what I do. And so it's almost second nature to have stuff like that. Even same deal with watching TV. I'll put the captions on because sometimes, these filmmakers, go a little crazy with their sound mix and you can't understand what people are saying. So I think as a society, it's become much more just commonplace. And people that don't have disabilities are taking advantage of that kind of stuff as well. But that being said, there are definitely still some places that need some work. For example, I was at a hotel this past week, and it was very difficult just getting into the building because they didn't have actual curbs and stuff like that, or curb cuts. And I was like, this is stupid. You got stairs over here. Why don't you have a accessible ramp for somebody? What would happen if somebody with a wheelchair was trying to stay at this hotel? They couldn't do it. And so, stuff like that is unfortunately still a thing. It's not nearly as much as, 30 some odd years ago. But like a lot of the people in the documentary said, there's still some opportunity for continued growth and whatnot. The idea of it was mind-boggling to me, that people weren't able to live their own lives the way that they wanted to. I think that hearing those stories, especially people that had to, like Kelly Buckland, for example, how he wasn't able to go to the theater because they didn't want him there. That hurt my heart because, with me being a filmmaker, I want you to go see the movie in the theater, right? And so simple stuff like that it was disheartening that people would be so, I guess the word is cruel to another human being. It's like, just because they have to live their life differently from you doesn't mean that their way of doing it is wrong, and that you can't adapt to, help them out in some way. And so, it was challenging hearing some of the stories. Parker had a lot of really great stories too, about some of the struggles that he went through. But it was, again, one of those things, is one of those tough conversations kind of things where it's like, we won't be able to fix it if we don't know what the problem is. And if we don't have any kind of emotional connection with these stories, then it doesn't matter if we're saying, we got to change it. If nobody cares about it, then nobody's going to want to do anything about it. The showings that I was able to go to, a lot of people came up to me afterwards and was just saying thank you, because they were very appreciative of the way that we told the story, not just in a educational, this exists kind of way, but also these are the things that people have to deal with, and here's how we can kind of fix it, because again, coming from that perspective of not knowing anything, it was really, for lack of a better word, accessible in terms of like, you don't have to be fully entrenched into this world to really understand and appreciate what's going on, because a lot of people are going to be like me, where they didn't know anything or they don't have any direct connection to that world. It makes it so that it's like, I can do something, I can, lend a hand, or I can, be more vocal about this or that. And so a lot of people came up to me and they were expressing those kind of feelings, and a lot of gratitude for creating this film.
For more information on inclusion, you can visit SILCGA.org and click on the tab Documentary. Thank you to Ty for speaking with us for today's episode. And thank you for listening to Accessibility Now, stories about accessibility in Georgia. Accessibility Now is a podcast produced by the Statewide Independent Living Council of Georgia. If you want to find out more about that organization, you can visit that same website at silcga.org. That's SILCGA.org. This has been your host, Desi Gillespie, and I just want to close by reminding you that a Georgia that includes everyone is better for all of us.